28 серпня продовжую роботу медіа-центру.
28th of August, Ukrinform, Ukraine Media Center. My name is Svetlana Chiporenko, and a part of main discussion platform, we will be discussing Mariupol genocides, and we will talk about the legal rationale of that war crime committed by Russian Federation. T4P initiative, Tribunal for Putin, is presenting the first document of this system. Rationale, all would understand what this war crime is about, but we're collecting evidence to make sure that Putin is held responsible together with other people who are responsible for that. We have here Yevhen Zakharov, director of Kharkiv human rights group, Mykhailo Romanov, the expert of Kharkiv human rights group, one of the authors of the submission. Also, Tetyana Samoderzhenkova will join us later. She's a coordinator of Mariupol office of the UHHRU. Also, we'll have Kateryna Buryakovska, Mykola Komarovskyi, a lawyer of the Kharkiv of human rights group. And Kateryna Buryakovska is the employee of the National Legal University named after Yaroslav Mudry. She is one of the co-authors of the submission. So why did the Kharkiv human rights group take over the task, and what needs to be done to make sure that all these people are held responsible? Hello? Can you hear me well? Thank you. So, our organization, Kharkiv Human Rights Group, early in March started collecting evidence, documenting war crimes, including crimes against humanity and genocide. And we saw that there are many of them, and that's crucial to record this evidence in order not to lose it, to make sure that we can help people behind these crimes responsible. The main point is holding criminals responsible and helping the victims suffered from crimes and compensating them for the harm that was done. On the 24th of March, we've announced the T4P, Tribunal for Putin initiative. More than 20 organizations joined us, and we've divided Ukraine into different regions where each organization would document the crimes and make records in the database. The database was ready. It was actually active since the previous period of war, and back then we started collecting information and recording it. So now we have more than 50,000 crimes. Well, actually, a bit less, like 49,000. So the question is what to do with it, how to hold people responsible, how to hold people who made orders, going up the whole vertical of power in Russia. And of course, national law enforcement agencies need to do that, and they have a priority. Of course, this is their task, and we absolutely agree with that. But we all understand, and they do understand, that no law enforcement around the world can handle that amount of crimes. It's impossible to investigate all of them. It can last for decades. So what we have now is we have national law enforcement agencies investigating priority crimes. And it's a lot less than the figure that I mentioned. So about up to 4% is crimes like shellings of civilian sites and just they don't have enough resources to investigate these crimes. And also there's international criminal court that opened investigation last year in March. But how many crimes they can investigate? Maybe 5, 6, maybe 10 in the best case scenario. And they do it with their own resources, like investigators, in-house investigators. What to do with other criminals and with other crimes, with other Ukrainians that suffered from the war. This is why we think that we need to generalize the top crimes that we have based on the information that we've collected and present this information in the form of a submission to the prosecutor's office in the International Criminal Court to draw his attention to these crimes, to showcase our information, our findings, and we hope that the International Criminal Court will make use of that information and will work on the crimes that we are talking about. This is why our organization, this is why our T4P initiative in general made 2 such submissions, and we'll talk about one of them today in more details. And also we are working on 5 more submissions like that. I would like to show you this first submission we'll be talking about today, genocide in Mariupol. Why Mariupol? Our organization, apart from Kharkiv Oblast, we've started covering Mariupol crimes because this is pretty hard to do, since there was no communication in Mariupol since March, and the situation was serious and violent there. Only you could reach people directly and collect their evidence. This is why we've created a working group that would consist of our representatives, Kharkiv Human Rights Group, and we've collected a lot of information, and this is how we wrote that submission, because we're sure that what they did in Mariupol is genocide. After we finish our presentation, you will be able to get a copy in English and Ukrainian. The second submission that we already did in Kharkiv, we presented it on the 22nd of August. It was dedicated to attacks against civilian sites in Ukraine. 80% of crimes I've talked about. That's only one copy. I just brought it to show you, and we'll print more of that. Another book I wanted to show you is Voices of War, Mariupol. These are interviews with people from Mariupol who told their stories. And we published it on our website in English and Ukrainian. Also, there's a video on YouTube that has lots of views. And so we collected that information. We've published it. And you can buy it in the local bookstore. You can buy it directly from us. And also we have distributors. This book is illustrated with works of a famous Ukrainian painter, Matvey Weisberg. There are 16 photos of Yevhen Zakharov, famous Mariupol photographer, who took all of his works through all of the borders and checkpoints, and now we have a possibility to include that in the book. So, I will just list things we keep working on, and we'll have more presentations, hopefully, for you. Well, first of all, we focus on the crimes that we qualify as crimes against humanity. Why these crimes? Because there's no such thing in Ukrainian criminal code. This is why national law enforcement agencies can't investigate these crimes against humanity. Only the International Criminal Court can do that. This is why we focus on these crimes, and we would like to show how systematic and large scale they are. And we hope that we'll draw some attention to that. We're almost finished the submission for the 7th article of the Rome Statute, Part 1, Item E, imprisonment and violent deprivation of liberties and basic human rights. In the database, we have around 1,000 incidents like that. More than half of them occurring in Kharkiv Oblast, and we will keep focusing on our region, Kharkiv Oblast. And as experience shows us, those who were liberated, they suffered from torture. We have more than 600 incidents of torture. 115 out of them have open cases where lawyers represent victims, and we will keep proving our point. And we think that torture is a crime against humanity. 7.1 Item F. Violent disappearance, just like abduction with witnesses. It's an element of occupational policy. In the database that we're keeping, we have more than 4,000 victims that disappeared, and lots of them are violent disappearances, which is a crime against humanity. Actually, it's the only crime against humanity that doesn't have an analog in the 8th article as a war crime, so that's why it's important. And of course, we are focusing on civilians after they were abducted or arrested with witnesses. We have more than 5,000 of people like that, 5.2 thousand. We have more than 10,000 submissions to the Ombudsman office. And these people are kept in Russia or occupied Donbass. Most of the cases, we still don't know where they are, without any allegations, without any investigations. They are there, they're in prison just because Russia wants to do so. And I think we need to focus on that, and this year we'll definitely will complete that submission. Another type of crime against humanity is murders, extrajudicial executions. They are a type of a murder. People dying from armed fire weapons. We have more than 800 victims in the database, and we have more. Especially in Kiev Oblast, in Bucha districts, we have people that died, that were killed, but they were undocumented. And now it's we cover these cases as well in our Kharkiv human rights group. I think by the end of the year we will be able to complete that. And the seventh submission is about genocide. Is sending people forcibly from Ukraine to Russia, and the prosecutor's office opened a criminal case in March this year. Now, there were 2 orders issued. The Russian president representative received that, but it was opened as a war crime, and we think that's one of the 5 genocide acts of genocide, and we've almost completed that submission. We want to translate it into the English language, and we would like to persuade the public and the prosecutor's office that it needs to be changed to genocide. There's forced sending of children from Ukraine to Russia. That's just my short introduction about what we're doing. We have other areas. We are helping victims, providing humanitarian, social, medical, rehabilitation assistance, and that's very necessary. All of these components, like documenting, investigating crimes, and assistance to victims, because they support each other, and only if we do it together and we use a complex approach, we can achieve some positive result. To be able to help as many victims as possible and hold as many criminals as possible responsible. Thank you, Yevhen. Let's talk about the document itself, Genocide in Mariupol. Yevhen, can you talk about that in more details? What kind of components and chapters it includes? Hello. Thank you for the possibility to comment on that. The crime of genocide, it's called the crime of the crimes. It's like the king of the crimes on one hand. On the other hand, it's one of the hardest crimes to document, to prove, and to research. I mentioned it to say that the amount of work that we've completed is quite large scale, but still it needs further rationale and a creation of array of evidence. And these crimes of genocide is regulated by many charters and laws, international laws, and also criminalized in Ukraine. We have a relevant article in the criminal code, and the description is pretty much the same with the international law. It has 5 different types of criminal activities, and they are in the international acts. We've used the Rome Statute, the act that regulates these crimes for the International Criminal Court. This is why we wanted to orient to the International Criminal Court. And again, what we have in our national law is identical. The national legislator uses the same criteria, same activities that exist in the international law. So what are these components? What are these types? Murders, that's the type number 1. Is pretty standard, pretty common. Serious bodily harm and causing mental disability. I think number 3 is creation of conditions that lead to these people being destroyed. So it's basically destroying conditions and depriving people from using different services, basic services. My colleagues will explain that in more details. Number 4 is activities related to the deprivation of childbirth. We haven't found episodes like that. This is why we didn't focus on that type of activity in our submission. We didn't provide any rationale for that. Another type is forced deportation of children, and we describe that in our submission. So we focused on basically 3 main types of genocide that we have identified, and we provided rationale for that as best as we could. The reason why I'm making this notice is that we did the submission in January this year, but at the time we didn't have any possibility to get more evidence. We didn't have access to that city. This is why we described all of the incidents based on open source information. But of course, we could get some evidence from people who fled the city and who agreed to do an interview, because every time we get evidence, we need to get informed consent. And that is a requirement for all of the submissions sent to the criminal court, International Criminal Court. These are the rules of the game that needs to be complied with, informed consent. And we've included the evidence into our submission document. This is why we've created that team. Every team member worked on a certain area, describing that area, and then we provide a rationale. So this submission has different chapters, like an introduction, a general description, and then we could lay out the facts. The reason why this particular crime is pretty hard, because it has double intent, and we need to justify it. Of course, it's intentional activity, but it has double subjective component. The person committing that crime needs to have an intention, not just focusing on murder, but it has an extra intent that scales it up. It uses that he uses that intent in order to destroy people, representatives of a certain group. And it's pretty hard to prove, because all of these parts, or these types of genocide can be only proven using external factors, and sometimes it's enough. When we're talking about the double nature of the intent, like the intent to destroy the whole group, that's not evident, that's not obvious. We need to prove that the person really had that intent to destroy all of the representatives of the group. And we studied the contextual element of genocide, which is a requirement. There are certain requirements in the document called Elements of Crimes, including those for the genocide. The environment, the context created by the political authorities of the Russian Federation, and the calls and statements made by them led to the fact that they had an intent to destroy Ukrainians as a nation. They reiterated that there is no such thing as Ukrainian nation. They also mentioned that it's like a disease and it needs to be fixed. So this context gave us justification that there is an intent to destroy the whole group. So then we had to prove our point. What is this national group? What this national group is that international documents, like the one about the genocide, include certain criterias for genocide focused on a certain group. National criteria, racial, religious criteria, and we focused on the national criteria. Because Ukraine is a country that doesn't have stable other criteria, and the progress of the events caused by Russian Federation made us believe that it is about nationality. And speaking about the judicial practice, this national criteria is the hardest to prove because majority of other criteria like ethnical and religious are more stable, are more evident, obvious, and easier to identify. The national criteria is a criteria that judges find hard to work with when they tried to prove genocide. Well, first it's about the objective criteria. It's just about the nationality or citizenship. But often it's not enough because there's also subjective criteria that has two components. One of them is about what's the aggressor's attitude towards these victims, like are they part of a nation? It's subjective component for those who commit the crime. On the other hand, it's also subjective towards the victims. They can also identify themselves with a certain group or not. And during the court hearings, they identified that while this criteria is pretty evident, it needs additional efforts, additional evidence to find out if it's there. But we focus on the national criteria because, again, for Ukraine and for events that keep happening, it's probably the most stable criteria in our case. Another complication that we faced related to our study of that crime is the scale, is the size of the group. Well, normally the genocide is proven as intent to destroy a group as a whole. But we found out that sometimes this eradication can be a partial, and there are a number of reasons behind that. If we take Ukraine as an example, Ukraine is a pretty big country, and it's hard to prove that the whole group was about to be eradicated. So we based on the fact that probably the crime of the genocide was implemented in a certain area, for example, in the city of Mariupol, and it was easier to do. And it was possible for those who committed the crime. And there were a number of motives behind that. But we think that the intent is there. And of course, Mariupol was a pretty easy target for the Russian military. It's not far from the border with the Russian Federation, and it's even during the beginning of the war, it was half-circled, surrounded by the Russian Federation. It's a 40-kilometer border, and also it was surrounded by the coastal area that was controlled by the Russian Federation. So answering the question why it wasn't implemented in other cities and why we refrain from investigating that in other cities, that's just because it was a lot easier to do that in Mariupol, and it was more efficient. I can draw a parallel with what happened in Srebrenica when Bosnian Muslims were destroyed, and they were part of a group. So not the whole group was eradicated, and it was done in a certain area. And this is when this crime was done in order to harm the whole group, because they were in a safe place. It had a status, a UN status of a safe haven. This is why they destroyed it, to demonstrate that despite being protected by international institutions, it's still possible to do. And we're based on the fact that we can draw some parallel with Mariupol and Srebrenica. So Mariupol is a possible target for Russians against Ukrainians based on the national criteria. I personally worked on describing of the first type of activities, murders, and ethically it's the easiest group to work with in terms of providing rationale. Of course, the number of victims is measured in tens of thousands in Mariupol. We couldn't identify a specific figure, but we just subtracted those that we knew about, that these people were evacuated or deported to Russia, and other data. And we came up with a number of 100,000 people. These people were murdered using different types, using different weapons. But in any case, these were murders, for sure. So in our submission, we have descriptions of these episodes, including some of these episodes that we're taking from our own database, the evidence that we've collected personally. And we're pretty sure about these facts, because each fact that we found, we try to verify to get more evidence to prove that they actually happened. And this is how we came to a conclusion that we can prove that. We can collect certain facts and evidence and group it in the form of submission. And I think we did a good job. The judges of the International Criminal Court will say if it's good enough. But we had people checking, doing a quality assurance of that report, and they were pretty skeptical about it, and they're not sure that it will be successful, but we based on the fact even when this type of crime is hard to prove, even if we don't have many chances to be successful, we still try to do that because we think that we need to create a certain wave that is mostly not about to prove these facts, but prove that there is a phenomenon like that, and it happens right here and right now. Thank you, Mykhailo. Would like to ask our technicians to invite Mr. Komarovsky. Mykola Komarovskyi, he's a lawyer working with the deportation of children. Mykola, are you here? Can you hear us? Hello? Yes, we can hear you. We know that there is a decision of the ICC about Putin, Lvova, Belova, in terms of deportation of children, but still deportation of children is not part of genocide. As far as I understand, the work that you did as part of this submission is focused on having ICC say that this is a part of a genocide. As it was already mentioned, we are working on the submission that will be focused on the deportation of children from all regions of Ukraine, and also the submission that we are presenting today about Mariupol includes a statement that children deported from Mariupol belong to that group, and children that were deported from the city of Mariupol, and the fact of deportation means that this is a genocide. This is part of a crime of genocide. Can you please elaborate on that? How did you work on collecting evidence, and how did you describe them in the document? Well, as it was already mentioned, part of genocide is a forced deportation of one place to another. It's in the Convention and the Rome Statute. And the question is, why genocide? Of course, the orders that were issued against Putin and Lvova Belova, it was qualified according to the Article 8 as a war crime. And I will get back to that. My point is to provide an overview about the information that we've collected. So I would first focus on 2022, 30th of May, where Putin issued an order saying that citizens of so-called Donetsk and Luhansk People Republic can get Russian citizenship based on the simplified procedure. They amended their legislation, and it allowed Ukrainian children get Russian citizenship with a simplified procedure. So that's the first thing we need to keep in mind, and that's very important to prove genocide. Speaking about evidence, most of the information that we've collected, and actually it's related to the information that we have gathered all around Ukraine about deportation. It was mostly collected from open sources. And it's a bit odd. And I kept thinking about that. Official authorities of Russian Federation and the website of the Russian ombudswoman, they did publication about these facts. They showcased that how many children they provided with the Russian citizenship. They did it openly. And we know cases about children's deportation from Mariupol to different recreation camps, and Mr. Andrushenko, the mayor's advisor, reported that, and these camps involved education of these children, but you can guess that this education was based on the Russian educational system. They provided children with a Russian version of the history. They talked about what happened in Ukraine from a Russia's perspective. Children that studied using a Ukrainian language, and they were brought into a different environment where they have a different perception of Ukrainian language, Ukrainian history and culture. On the 5th of July 2022, they issued first passports in Moscow Oblast, and this was a group of children, included children from Mariupol. On the website of the Russian Department in Family and Children Affairs had information that thousands of children from Mariupol found their families in Tyumen, Kemerovo, Irkutsk Oblast, and Altai area. And when this information made its way to Ukrainian media, they deleted that, and the Russians said that their websites were hacked. But when we worked with the submission, we used certain services to store the information, but it turns out this information was true. They really tried to hide these facts, and they thought they did, but still were able to store this. And also the Russian ombudsman adopted one of the boys from Mariupol. His name is Philip, and she did some publications in her Telegram channel, and she said she was happy that she was able to do so. Now he's in Russia, he's in a safe environment, and his future belongs to Russia. And this is just advertising, and the fact that this boy was adopted by a Russian official is very obvious, and we can draw some conclusions here. And also we know some cases where families went through filtration camps. They took children from their families, and there's a boy from Mariupol, Alexander Rachuk. He told his story on different platforms, and he was taken from his mother in one of these filtration camps, and he's never seen her since then. And with the help of his grandma, he was brought back, and he wasn't adopted. So just to sum it up, the reason why we think that this crime type should be requalified from the Article 8, well, first, these children, their civil status is changed, and the convention is against that. It's against providing education that is essentially different from the education received before, and these children are adopted. And also considering that Russians have an intent to destroy this group, this national group in Mariupol, so there is an intent to eliminate this group, and this is why we think that this is a genocide. Thank you, Mykola. We're inviting Kateryna Buryakovska. Kateryna worked on such facts as creating conditions that lead to the eradication of groups. And please tell us more about that. Thank you. Can you hear me well? Yes. Good afternoon, everyone. Dear colleagues, I'm happy to see your faces. Yes, my work on that submission was related to the item C, Article 6 of the Rome Statute. It says that the intent to destroy a group under protection can be implemented through creating conditions that lead to its partial or full eradication, physical eradication. And we mentioned that genocide is one of the crimes that are hard to prove in court. I'd say that item C inside the genocide chapter is one of the most challenging. And if you consider certain legal acts, because it's part of a non-material component, in order to prove murder, you need to prove the existence of bodies and this type of rationale, justification is pretty challenging. And in the ICC practice, existing ICC practice in special criminal tribunals, it's very limited because we don't have much information about it and we don't have much experience out there that allows us to use it without problems. However, the existing practice in the international law were pretty helpful, and they helped us to provide justification that we have as part of the publication. Just wanted to make a short introduction, since we are talking about the creation of conditions aimed at the physical eradication. We had to limit the time scale to 2022 because we had a temptation to have a modern perspective on what happens in Mariupol right now, but our advisors recommended us to focus on this particular time scale. And the point was how to convert the victims' feelings, how do you convert them into something tangible legally. I will focus on certain elements that exist in this subjective and contextual element of that crime. But getting back to the text of this item, it was very important to understand what kind of conditions we're talking about, conditions that can theoretically lead to partial or full physical eradication of a protected group. The element of crime that we've mentioned, it's an integral part of the Rome Statute, says that such conditions can include intentional deprivation of resources required for everyday life and taking people out of their homes. And also we need to focus on the physical eradication. There are no justification other than that. And the Convention about Genocide, the UN Convention, includes a description of conditions that are aimed at physically destroying of the group. So we are talking about physical eradication here. So we are talking about conditions leading to death. But apart from the item A that talks about getting people responsible for murder, they don't immediately kill people, but they aim at having these people killed or died. And the tribunal for Yugoslavia, they didn't list specific conditions, but nevertheless, they talk about conditions that have high chances to lead to the person's death or to this person belonging to the protected group. And there was an attempt to interpret these conditions to arrest Mar al-Bashir. They listed the facts of poisoning water basins for certain ethnic groups, together with deportation, relocation. It was all aimed at the eradication of these ethnic groups. So we, based on that legal justification, we try to prove that the shellings of Mariupol from different types of weapons, they led to the creation of conditions that had higher chances to destroy the national group of Ukrainians that lived in Mariupol on the 24th of February. And also the context needs to be taken into account, that this is an urban area. There was an interesting stance of the International Red Cross Committee. They did an analysis of urban conflicts. And they say that urban area has a complex network of services and subsystems, and people are in the middle of these subsystems. And the International Committee of Red Cross calls it an urban paradox. Living in such developed systems, people become very vulnerable during armed conflicts, vulnerable to failures, considering their social dynamics and governance, which makes these environments different from non-urban areas. So Mariupol found itself in such a situation where in the first days of the full-scale invasion, during the attacks against the civil infrastructure, attacks against the food supplies, communication, utilities, water supply, together with forced deportation, led to the situation where conditions were created to physically eradicate a national group of people, of Ukrainians that lived in Mariupol at the moment. In the publication, under item C, you can find information that was collected from open sources like web resources, press publications, reports from different humanitarian missions that were located in Mariupol at the time. Well, the last of them left Mariupol on the 15th or 17th, I think. The representatives of the Red Cross reported in his Twitter that Ukrainian colleagues are hiding in the city without access to natural gas and electricity. So people in Mariupol were deprived of these basic conditions, critical conditions. And especially during winter and early spring 2022, after people were deprived of preconditions to cook food and boil water, they started looking for water in wells. They tried to get foods from damaged stores, grocery stores. They tried to cook food. An open fire, it created another risk for people. They became targets for shellings, and many evidence demonstrate this trend, that people who try to get water from wells, they became targets by the Russian military. Can you please sum it up? Can you please wrap up your speech? So the last thing that I want to say that about what we need to do, analyzing the subjective component, based on the fact that the events that happened during that period in Mariupol, these were shellings from different types of armor, and in order to understand how to prove the subjective component, we wanted to prove the intent. We appealed to the international humanitarian law because all of the key principles, like the proportionality, all of these principles were violated by the Russian party. These are the war crimes they talk about, but the violation of the international humanitarian law and these war crimes were instrumentalized by the Russian side to commit genocidal acts. Thank you, Kateryna. We're inviting Tetyana Samoderzhenkova. She's joining us online. Tetyana is a coordinator of the Mariupol office of the Ukrainian Helsinki Union, Human Rights Union, and one of the co-authors of the submission. Can you please talk about what you did? I know you described facts for this document. How did you collect the facts, and what evidence was included in that submission? Tetyana, you're muted. Now we can hear you. Yes, sorry for that. I collected the information from open sources, just like my colleagues, and the information that I received during the time I provided the legal assistance to people from Mariupol. And when I was physically in Mariupol until the 15th of March, I could see what happened in the city. This is why the information that I provided was what I personally experienced. I tried to describe physical injuries. Sorry, the sound is disrupted. Tetyana, we're losing the sound for some reason. Sorry for that. Yeah, I think it's good now. Okay. Yeah, sorry for that. We collected information from doctors, They kept saying that there were many wounded people in hospitals and they couldn't provide them with medical services. And there was information about the International Red Cross, about the evacuation, the possible evacuation, and also it was not always safe to provide people with medical supplies. There were lots of rumors about airstrikes against Mariupol, including multi-apartment buildings and Mariupol theater. I think my colleagues talked about some of these cases. So these are the facts that I can work with, that I can describe. This is what I did, and these focused attacks led to the situation where hospitals were flooded with injured people who were operated in the hallways, and nurses did everything possible to bring injured people from the streets, and doctors worked sometimes without power, without water. And based on evidence, people screamed, crying for help. There was lots of blood. People were bleeding. The sound is disrupted. Tetyana, can you hear us? Unfortunately, the internet connection is pretty bad, so can you please make your speech shorter? Tetyana, can you hear us? Well, you're back. Your internet connection is very unstable, unfortunately. So can you please sum it up? Because we've lost half of what you were saying, unfortunately. Tetyana? Oh, unfortunately, she disconnected. So let's talk offline. Alexandra, we all understand the meaning, what you did to prove the crimes committed by Russian Federation, not just in Mariupol, but all over Ukraine, proving the acts of genocide. What meaning does it have for the international community? Well, this is the unique work that we did out of thousands of facts, thousands of different types of crimes. This is one of the hardest category, and the documenting methodology they used in the ICC shows us that there are lots of different legal nuances and subtleties, but still we could prove that Russian Federation is trying to destroy Ukraine as a nation, as a state, and we never existed before. They try to prove that we never existed before, and that we're just backward Russians. And we need to prove it in legal terms. So it's important not just to say that it's genocide because we feel it is, but just like our colleagues, we need to break it down into using different legal aspects included in certain jurisdictions and conventions. There is one of the cases where 28 countries has joined in, and we are now, instead of talking about our feelings, we are talking about providing a rationale, and they should be included into the history books, and the result of this should be persecution of Putin and Russian authorities, because Mariupol is an example where thousands of people suffer from Putin's decision and the decision of Russian authorities to start aggression that is aimed at eradication of Ukrainian nation. It was not. It's harder to prove compared to acts against Muslims in Srebrenica and genocide against Jews, because Ukrainians never claim that we are a mono-ethnic group. And in order to describe us as a national group, we need to define these boundaries ourselves. And our colleagues really showed how you can do that legally, even without having access to the territory, how you can talk about certain proved aspects. It's really a unique document because it's the first legal effort like that. And the Tribunal for Putin and the Kharkiv Human Rights Group will continue working, and every next submission to the International Criminal Court that ideally wants the International Criminal Court to use these submissions to get Russian authorities responsible. That would be the ideal result. Even if these cases will not be analyzed by the International Criminal Court, by other courts, it will nevertheless record it as a fact of genocide for the whole international community. Even if we're not talking about the regions that are our allies, like Europe, the USA, but countries that are part of the UN, countries that are voting for these documents. I'm talking about Latin America and African countries. They will always use the legally proven facts, not just our feelings that we think it's a genocide against us. This is why it's critical for us today. Thank you. Before we start Q&A session, we have one online question. Sergei Gritsenko from the EU delegation says, you are talking about claims, Russian claims against Ukraine and that were aimed to destroy Ukraine. How can you hold them responsible? Well, our organization doesn't work with that types of crimes. That's not genocide. That's calls for genocide, and that's a separate type of crime. As far as I know, other teams work with that, with this rationale. I think that it's still possible. It's easier to do compared to what we're doing because it was published, it's there, it's recorded, and I think you can work with that. Thank you. What are questions? Hello, Olga Opanasenko, Ukrinform. Can you please name the figures? How many deportation facts we're talking about? How many did you mention in the submission? And how many witnesses you have to prove these data? If our experts online are still there, Kateryna, Mykola is not. Oh, well, we have Mykola. Actually, that's good. So I guess this is a question for you, Mykola. Yeah, thank you for the question. As far as the submission is concerned, all of the data about children deportation were collected from the open sources. Speaking about the specific figure, it's very hard to say because publications I mentioned when I talked about my area, well, it covers more than thousands of children, but I'm not sure about the specific figure for Mariupol, but these cases are there and we know about them. Thank you. Next question. Sergei Kutnyakov, editor of Kraina Uspikhu from Mariupol. Thanks for your efforts. That's a huge amount of work. And hopefully you will be successful in holding these criminals responsible. The question is for Yevhen. Are there any evidence of ethnicide and linguicide? Because when they crossed to different checkpoints, they warned them, don't you dare to speak Ukrainian over there. And a question for Mykhailo. Evidence of discrimination of different types. There's a sixth principle of Olympism. Any national committee can be punished for any discrimination based on race, nationality, gender, political views. Whenever you're affiliated with Olympic movements, and maybe Tetyana, it was very hard for me to figure out, to learn about all the people dying and throwing themselves out of the window because they couldn't have any food or medication. But the legal description of a genocide doesn't include, I think you mentioned linguicide and ethnocide. It's not included. We can only work with categories that are in the Rome Statute, in the UN Convention Against Genocide. These 5 different acts of genocide we talked about. And there is no such thing as a cultural genocide. And the practice that we have in terms of genocide is very hard to relate to the Ukrainian case. It just doesn't work well. It's not just our opinion, it's opinion from different experts, international experts, and I think we need to review that description of that crime. Raphael Lemkin came up with this word, actually, and he coined the term, he described the word. He had cultural, ethnical groups there, but they were not included in the convention. And of course, the collectivization, the artificial famine, and the USSR couldn't allow this to happen. This is why it was not included. This same can be applied to the problem of discrimination. Discrimination is one thing, and genocide is totally different thing legally. This is why we couldn't work with that. Just my 5 cents about discrimination. Yes, it's not related to genocide, so it's not here, but we have cases like that, and we faced them when we started the situation in Mariupol, but they were not included. And I think it's more related to crimes against humanity. And I'm talking about apartheid, things that are more related to discrimination. Yeah, and there were lots of atrocities. We've collected lots of information about Mariupol, about people who died there, the way people died there, how children died there. Well, it's really terrible. The way Russians indiscriminately shelled buildings one after another and destroyed them. How snipers shot people staying in the queue. A queue of people tried to get water. People who tried to cook food on the open fire. There were people who died from hunger because they were left on top floors and people couldn't reach them. They died from hunger without water. When people, during bombardments, they basically jumped out of windows. Threw themselves down, not being able to bear. They basically committed suicide because they couldn't withstand it. There were lots of stories. And as far as children were concerned, Tetyana worked with these facts a lot. There were 2 children, their family died, and they were lost, and their grandma kept looking for them. And then she found out that they were in the hospital in Donetsk, so she went there and she took them. But it was very hard to do. And things that she lived through, it's horrible. This is why we made this book. We covered only half of the interviews in Mariupol. We have more than that. I'm sorry, we'll just add. Actually, it's not just about a single episode. The horrible thing is that it gets worse. So Mariupol was occupied and liberated in the practice that Russian Federation brought and that they're using for 8 years, and it's getting worse. The terrible thing is that we couldn't stop it back in 2015. Now we have precedents that break international humanitarian law. The things that are there in the law, it's not enough to stop Russian Federation from doing that. So that's the most horrible thing. We couldn't make sure that the international community stops that. Now we have genocide as a result in Mariupol. Do you have any more questions? Maxim Bezorg, civil organization, a lawyer, civil organization of veterans. Well, what is the practice of working with cases like that, and what kind of court decision we can count on, and what is the number of people that should be held responsible for these crimes? Thank you. Well, actually, speaking about time frames, it depends on whether we have evidence, whether we could record them, and is it evident who did that? Even if the person or people are in Russia, well, and they could not be interviewed, if we have enough evidence against a certain person, well, even if they're not there, we can do it in absente. And then we can have a court hearing. So it depends on the evidence. But we don't have many cases like that. Because as far as Mariupol is concerned, we don't have any access to the crime scene. And it's very hard to collect evidence, not even talking about the investigation, the forensic tests and everything. So it's very hard to talk about the time frames. Well, speaking about deoccupied territories, well, there's some progress ongoing, like in Kiev, in Kharkiv Oblast. Crimes committed against tortured people, abducted people, imprisoned people, people killed from firearms. And there's some progress with that, but overall, I can't say it's happening fast because we are short on resources. In the law enforcement agencies in Kharkiv Oblast, each investigator works can cover more than 1,500 crimes if you break it down. So it's very hard to say how long it's going to happen because it really depends on the hostilities, on the success of Ukrainian counterattack. So it's very hard to make any forecasts. Now, speaking about the International Criminal Court, I think they could work with that, with some of these cases. But they are also limited in resources. They need to do investigations, and I think soon we will hear more information about what they're working on, attacks against energy infrastructure, because Russian authorities are involved because they actually documented their crimes. So I personally expect them to make a public announcement of that. The criminal court, International Criminal Court, only works with the personal participation of Russian authorities. Even if we prove that, for example, 3 divisions participated in genocide in Mariupol, if this case is opened, their commander, their top commander, will be held responsible. If it's Putin, it's going to be Putin. If it's some general, it's going to be a general. Other soldiers and officers, they need to be persecuted in the national court or in other form of a tribunal created for Ukraine. Thank you very much for your efforts. I truly believe that all of the military and political criminals from Russia will be persecuted for genocide very soon. And as part of reminding you that as part of our discussion platform, we talked about proving of genocide, crime of genocide committed by Russian Federation, and we will also have another event at 2 p.m. We will have a memorandum signed between the International Association of Lawyers and the Inter-Faction Deputy Association of the Ukrainian Parliament and the All-Ukrainian Civil Organization, the Association of Legal Specialists of Ukraine. Please stay with us.